Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Strand. My name is Sabir, and I direct events here. For a little bit of history, Strand was founded in 1927 by the Bass family over on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled until, after over 92 years, Strand is the sole survivor, still run by the Bass family, and still housing new and used books. Tonight, I'm excited to welcome Jia Tolentino as we celebrate the launch of her long-awaited book, Trick Mirror. Jia is a staff writer at The New Yorker, formerly the deputy editor at Jezebel and a contributing editor at Hairpin. She grew up in Texas and went to the University of Virginia and got her MFA in fiction from the University of Michigan. Her work has appeared in the New York Times Magazine, Time, Grantland, Slate, Pitchfork, Bon Appetit, Spin, and Fader. Joining Jia is writer and interviewer Thora Seamson. Please join me in welcoming Thora and Jia to Strand.
I'm so loud. I just want to apologize for not walking out to the Ballers theme song, as I promised two of my friends that I would.
Hi.
Hi, guys. Thank you for coming tonight. I'm so loud.
Hello? Is that on?
I don't think it's on. Is it?
It is? Okay, hi. Congratulations on your book.
Thanks, Thora.
So,
It's doing a lot better than I thought it would.
this is what I thought it would do. Hi. I wanted to open with asking about why you didn't want it to sound memoiristic, and what was that choice?
Like to not write a straight memoir?
Yes.
Oh, I never even considered it. Even though, one of the strangest things about, since I started at The New Yorker, a consistent edit I get in every single piece is why don't you start it in the first person? And I'm like, ugh. I shy away from that. That's something that I do naturally. I am a natural, if I'm at a bar, I will just tell the person I'm talking to my life story. I'll spill my darkest secrets. And I think it's something that I try to correct against in my writing, to not just spill for the sake of it. And also, I'm a little wary of that being something that, being a writer right now or being a person right now is already so persona forward. Did this just turn off, or am I getting normal? Okay. I think that the world right now tends to, it's we're kind of, these systems are making your persona more important than your work. And a lot of times, and being a writer, being a young woman writer, it's especially conducive to that. And so I think there was no way I was going to write a memoir, because I'm not really that interested. I'm interested in myself, like any self-interested person, but the world is much more interesting to me than me. And it just so happens that the ways I've learned to be interested in the world happen to mostly have come from firsthand experience. But yeah, I never even thought of it. Not thought of doing a memoir.
Yeah, we've talked about that, how when you're writing about being a self in context, and then the self becoming the more interesting part of the system that you're writing about, the self being a part of.
Not the context.
Yeah. What did you presume your readers knew about you then when you organized the chapters?
For better or worse, I didn't think about that at all. You could that could be my answer to any question, well, how did you think about this today? I'm well, the answer is I didn't think about it. Yeah, I think, in general, I feel I try to write to answer questions for myself. And yeah, I don't really, the question of what will this person know about me or think about me seems like a dangerous one. It seems like one that is a bad one. It's kind of off the point of writing. I was yeah.
I've said this to you also, but starting with the internet essay I thought was so smart, because what it induced for me was avoidance of the internet and not looking at social media, and finishing the book in a day because I felt indicted. And so I've And that's one of the great pleasures of reading is how what you're reading sort of inflects the observations that you're making, and especially knowing I'd be up here in conversation with you, just like getting through the week as a woman felt like doing research for this talk.
What did you find out?
Well, the optimization chapter. How many people here have already read the book? Okay, yay, that's exciting. So there's 9 chapters, and the optimization one is the third, or the third or the fourth?
Yeah.
And can you...
Explain it?
Yes.
So the optimization essay it came out of so I used to, when I worked at Jezebel, the office used to be above the Lululemon flagship store in Union Square, and I had all these fantasies. Remember that kids book, The Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basiley Frankweiler,
yes.
right, where they hide in the. So I was like, what if I did a stunt piece where I just hide for a week in Lululemon? I was like, it's so big. It was 17,000 square feet. I was just like, what the fuck is in there? What is it? What is Lululemon? And I would get this so Lululemon, there were spaces in New York that I would walk around, and I would have it was so mundane, and then my brain would have an earthquake, and I had these shimmers of existential dread. It was it was Lululemon and Sweet Green, because it was they were within 2 blocks of each other, and I would always go to Sweet Green, and I'd be on Slack editing. It's in the line for Sweet Green, get my salad without making eye contact, and then email while I ate my fucking salad, and it was so normal. And then sometimes my brain would just glitch, and I'd be what's happening? This great void of existential dread would open up. And it was the same when I passed by Lululemon, and I was just why? It was and I was oh, these are optimization industries, right? These are industries that there's already this American idea that everything should be getting more perfect, faster, more efficient, more beautiful, forever and ever and ever. And I think that it manifests in a really interesting way on the body. And I think it manifests in a really interesting way on the female body, right? Because I think from middle school, I understood that a consumer definition of being a woman was understanding yourself as something that needed to be constantly improved in a way that I'm not sure men experience quite as intensely by all the marketing that's them. Anyway, so I was just thinking about optimization, and there are so many, so much of the millennial era sort of business successes are things, they're optimization industries. They're things that make you more efficient, better able to function in a kind of punishing world. The art or the whole wellness industry is kind of an optimization industry. We must be functioning at peak beauty, and, but it's for what? So we can work harder and harder and harder and harder, so hard that we have to keep eating salads and working out, and yeah. So so the Lululemon thing specifically, I would always walk by it, and I just had this idea. I was Lululemon is late capitalist fetish wear, and I didn't, but I knew this deep in my soul, but I didn't understand why I thought it. And then I wrote 10,000 words and figured it out. But I think the answer is Lululemon treats the female body like a market, like an asset, like a market asset that can be divisible into further assets that all have to keep increasing their market performance, and I was just and yet I also do these things, I go to workout classes where it's you go part to part, you're, anyway. That's that essay. It's a fun read.
Indeed. And I have my mind's
Did you optimize this week? I mean, we probably all did. We live in New York.
I'm not going to talk about that.
Yeah.
But
you look good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was funny. Your answer just reminded me, I was wondering what makes the book personal, I think, is the bearings, your bearings within these systems. And your answer reminded me that it was just proximity. You were working nearby Lululemon and Sweet Green, and so that's how these became your examples. And I think that's true for a lot of writers. Your answer was reminding me when, Rachel Kushner wrote The Mars Room. and she was asked about like choosing prison as the setting for the contemporary novel. She was just like, well, I could see from my office window a jail and people being taken from there. So often it's just your environment.
Yeah, and also like systems pop up. I mean, I think like systems surface in everything. Like I think a lot of this book is about systems and the way they influence our sense of self, and they, like the idea of optimization. It's visible in every every block in New York. Like these. Yeah, but I had never really thought about that, but it's true that everything in the book, like each subject, is something that I just happened to be there.
Right.
Yeah.
Another thing is that you've told me that writing's purgative for you, and that you both don't realize what you think about a thing until you write about it, and then you often don't think about it much after you've written about it. Yeah. Is this the most you've had to like then talk about things you've written ever?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I like to have a nice blank mind. I like to have a nice empty mind. And I think, and yeah, that like in a lot of ways, that was the impetus for this book, was like, there was the, like, I would just, there were like these 9 things that I couldn't stop thinking about in some way. And for like a year, I'd been like getting drunk and being like, I'm going to write a long thing about that sometime. And I was like, okay, just do it. Just like fucking do it. And I think I like writing about something because I prefer my mind to be blank. And when something is really troubling me, I can't stop thinking about it. And the only way to figure out why I'm thinking about it is to write about it. And then my brain goes back to blank again. But now this past month, I have been talking about writing a lot more. And it's also made me realize that, like, I truly, like, the reason why I write is because I'm not good at speaking.
I disagree.
Thank you.
I think we all do. A couple other things about that. I wonder if there's anything you'd like to... Was it always 9?
It was always 9. Before I pitched the book exactly as I wrote it, and it was sort of like... okay, like the back of my head was like, it had all these like bins in it, and then things would happen and I would just like I was like, that gets sorted in this thing. And then like 9 of them filled up enough that I was like, I can spend a year and a half writing about them.
Our mutual friend calls you the fastest hand in the East, and Max Neely.
Oh, yeah.
And also timeliness has been a big part of the press cycle. You filed your book on time.
I didn't know that that's like,
I know,
like I actually I like was texting my editor. I was like, all right, I'm going to get it in. And he was like, oh, he was like so surprised. He was like, you can do it late. And I was like, what? like what? I have margin for error. Like, please don't ever tell me that.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I assumed
I need to be like dangling on the precipice of unemployment at all times.
People finding it remarkable that you filed on time. I thought by dint of you being that type of person, you would be perplexed by us being like, wow, she was on time. But because you were on time, are there things that you've had since, like observations that you've wanted to fit into the 9 that you've wanted to bring up, but haven't?
I feel like there was another good scam story recently. Who was it? Was there a good scam story recently? I mean, one of the essays is about scams. Like, one of the essays is about like the recession to the election, just like the 7 scams that have defined this past decade and like my entire coming of age. Like, and I remember like after I turned that in, there were just like, my editor and I would text every 2 weeks being like, should we add the like varsity blues shit? Like, should we add, there was just always more and more and more. That one, but honestly, like once I write about something, it's like, this is me giving myself permission to stop obsessing about it. So I haven't thought about it much.
So there's this like LOL line in this scam essay. I'll read it. Bacardi Triangle. The weekend in 2016 when Bacardi made the inexplicable decision to pay for thousands of people to fly to the Bermuda Triangle to see Calvin Harris and Kendrick Lamar perform on a Puerto Rican beach. They put us up. I was there, of course, in a sprawling resort. It gave us 3 days of open bar. It was just like Fyre Fest, except it worked. And also, we were the ones scamming Bacardi.
Wow, we lost a lot of good men at Bacardi Triangle. Oh my God, two of the friends that I went with are right here. It was, it was great. It was great. I never get to scam anybody, or arguably I'm scamming you all by getting you to buy my book. But like, it was like the first time that it was like, so part of the reason that I wrote that scam essay, right, is that I think that there's been sort of like, it's sort of entrenched itself in the millennial ethos, like even like the entire idea of like getting a great idea and like flipping your company before you have to do any work. Like that's an extremely accepted, venerated idea of millennial success. Like if I could do it, I would, you know? I think it's part of the reason that Trump was elected. Like it's like, I compare it to why people buy lottery tickets. It's like, it's not because you think you're going to win. It's because you want to experience that sort of like vicious glee of getting one over, even if you're experiencing it through someone else. Like we've seen, like starting with the housing crisis, like student debt, like, you know, we've just seen so many people not be held accountable for like profit that they shouldn't have made. You know, we've seen so many people abuse trust for profit and nothing happens, that I think there's a little bit, I can feel it in myself. Kind of, you know, like the Anna Delvey story. Like I was kind of like, hell yeah, bitch, you know, like, you know, and like the Firefest thing, like we have this weird sort of quasi-generational attraction to scamming, and Bacardi Triangle, I was like, I got to do it. Like I somehow like slipped off the press list, like didn't have to write about it, just like, you know, like saw Kendrick play like on the beach, like drinking free horrible Bacardi. Like it was amazing. And they never repeated it again. They lost so much money.
How do you decide on the proportion of jokes when you're writing about these subjects?
I feel like actually, I don't know if there are that many jokes in the book. I think like, so one of the reasons that I used to write fiction. I wrote a novel and shelved it because I thought it was bad. And one of the reasons I thought it was bad is because it wasn't funny. And I don't think I'm a funny writer, but I think when you read me, it's like very clear that I'm like this. And, you know, like, I don't think I'm funny in the way of jokes in my writing ever. But I think like you can't write about scamming. Like it is funny. Like the whole thing's funny. Like juicer, like the Masked Brothers thing is funny. Remember those like $700 juicers? And then Bloomberg figured out you could just like squeeze the juice packs and it was faster. Like it's funny. Like some of this stuff is like Sweet Green is funny. Like, you know, a lot of, I think also, a lot of the book is about things in our world that are kind of damning and bad and kind of intractable. And I think one of the only ways to be able to write about that stuff at the length and the intensity that I wanted to was to not be dead serious about it, because it's like that's not how we feel in our life anyway. Like even the worst things, that's part of how we process it, is understanding that, you know, it's funny how we all want to die, you know? Haha.
Which essay feels the most personal to you in the book?
The essay, I think, Mom. My mom's in the front row. Shout out to my mom. I think the essay that feels the most personal is like, it's the one that was excerpted in the New Yorker about growing up in this mega church, which, yeah, we've talked about. Like we both had this, I think a lot of people had this experience, and I think especially in the Bush era, it was a really intense one. In like being in a conservative religious environment when the world was sort of run that way, when like people respected power in a different way than they do now. And yeah, like I fact checked a lot of this book by reading my old notebooks, and it was like both of the really personal ones in here, which is like that, and there's an essay about how I went on a reality TV show for a month when I was 16. Those were like, I had kept meticulous records of all of this because I always kept a journal. And it was like, there aren't that many things that make me uncomfortable, but yeah, like reading your journal from when you're 13 is wild, you know, and I let some of it in. Like there was like a lot of really genuine religious yearning in the ecstasy thing that I have basically forgotten about because it was 18 years ago at this point, you know, and like I will write about myself very easily and not think much about it. But those two things, it was strange. And the reality TV one was strange too, because like I did actually figure, like I feel like what I'm always looking for in writing is figuring something out, like figuring out anything new at all, even if it's just understanding that I don't understand something in a new way. And this reality TV show, I had always, for the last like 15 years, I'd been like, if I ever mentioned it, I said, I went on this thing by accident. Like my brother was finishing hockey practice and like this person was making a tape and I got cast and it was a fluke. And then it was going back and realizing like, no, you like, bitch, you thought you were special. Like you thought you wanted to be seen, like really reckoning with how intensely that desire has been in me, was good and felt bad too.
Yeah, and it allowed for really sly observations about family and personality. Yeah. I don't know how much more time we have, but I wanted to, let's see.
What, 10 more minutes? You got 10 more minutes.
Okay, perfect. In the Pure Heroines chapter, another quote, surely you'll have noticed, although I don't want to be too generous, that all the characters in this essay are white and straight. This, perhaps, is the heroine's subtext. The presumed universality of her own straight whiteness is the literary heroine's shallow revenge. So your book, I feel, doesn't presume a universality. And also, what about readers who wouldn't have noticed? We've talked about a conservative reader, and also their outreach. I read in The Creative Independent means a lot to you when you can see that you've gotten feedback from someone who wouldn't have thought that way or wouldn't have had the same kind of, wouldn't have been following the thread, like it might have been a revelation to them.
Yeah. Yeah, like one thing that I really value about my job right now is that like I can go out and report, and I basically am able to show all my cards. Like I don't have to pretend. I mean, this idea, especially, I mean, there's like a long tradition of this in the essay, this idea of like like kind of a universal objectivity and authority is not something that I've ever been able to access as a person for a variety of reasons. And in my work, I can say, like, I can show that I'm a feminist and like, that I'm pro-choice, whatever. I can say that I believe in free abortion on demand, and still report on these things. And I appreciate that. I feel like it's more honest to show where you're coming from and then push against it from both sides. And so anyway, so I always write about things from a pretty firmly far left point of view. And one of the things that I find most rewarding, but I always read it with like, if someone, because I grew up, I don't think I met a Democrat till I was in college. And I think I always try to read things like if you were staunchly pro-life and you read this piece about abortion, like, could you understand that I'm trying to be as fair and as clear as I can and trying to think about you as in as good a faith as I possibly can? And I think it's a good internal barrier to have to jump over while writing. And it is incredibly, like, actually, I get a lot of emails like that. And sometimes like a "you've changed my mind" email, which seems impossible these days, right? Like it's like to change someone's mind seems basically impossible, and it feels like a miracle when it happens. Yeah.
And the other comment about conservatism brings us to the last essay in the book, which is about weddings. Yeah. And you remark that your attendance is because like a social conservatism has like been a part of the backgrounds of the lives of the people that you've known. Yeah. And that you've, until recently, I think the line is something like, I didn't earn $35,000 until several years ago, yeah. But I've spent that much on weddings of friends that I've attended. Yeah. Why was that last?
That essay?
Did you have cold feet towards the essay?
I have cold feet towards the idea of writing about weddings. It was last actually because it was the one I was least sure about writing. It was the one I was least sure about. So I think a through line through the entire book is that I think it is less clear now what the use of knowledge is in general. You know, like I've said this a lot, but I think it's the internet feeling, right, of knowing so much about something and having less ability to change it than ever. And I often think that about, like, you know, what is the use of figuring out exactly. I think we're also coming to a point in contemporary life where we are understanding that individual decisions don't really, I mean, they matter, but they don't matter that much. It's systems that matter. It's policies that matter. And so, for example, it's like with climate change, right? Like, we can talk all we want about paper straws. Like, it doesn't really matter. And I think that sort of sense of my decisions or my thoughts are so small, like, you know, positioned within the system are so infinitesimal that it can almost feel pointless, I think, to just like figure out this world, because there's so, and I try to think about that in terms of always remembering there are levers, there are mechanisms to change the world. They just all involve public policy, you know. But the weddings essay, there's not much. That's the one that doesn't necessarily intersect with too much policy. Like, everything else kind of does, but that one, it's like I have known. I'm still like a straight woman that's been in monogamous relationships for the last, 15 years of my life. Like, I can figure out all I want about why getting invited to 47 weddings in the last 9 years has made me, like, briefly drove me completely insane, but it doesn't matter, because it's like I'm still a straight woman who has always organized her life this way. And like, I love, like, I'm effectively married. I have been for a long time. Nothing like me understanding the things that, the fact that, like, the traditional wedding is actually, it's not very traditional. It was, like, invented by a department store in the, like 30s, 40s, 50s. Like, it doesn't really matter. It's not going to change my life. It's not going to make it any less logical for people to get married, because all they're trying to do is, like, celebrate love in a world that's terrible, And I think the question of, like, what is the use of figuring this out, and my countervailing hope that there was still a use no matter what, that was magnified in that last essay. I was the least sure about it in general, and it ends on such an uncertain note. It ends on the uncertain note that the book began on, so it seemed like a natural close.
So when you're packaging this book, you have to name your own comps, and so writers whose books have opened the door for a book like this to exist. Yeah. And we've talked about the discrepancy between who you named and then now what's sort of being talked about in the press cycle. Yeah. And you interviewed two of your comps. Yeah, well, yeah, that's, I guess, like, when you, like, sell a book, you have to be like, in the tradition of, and I was like, oh, this is, but also, I mean, yeah, like I said, like, Leslie Jameson, Zadie Smith, like, essayists that I love, but it always, it doesn't, it's like we're all our own selves. Like, the comp thing, I don't love it. Yeah. Yeah, I was telling you that it doesn't sound like you're trying to sound like anyone else. It sounded very distinctly you, but every, like, clip was like the Joan Didion of our time. Yeah, that's crazy. And it was this. What do you see that you share? Oh, well, yeah. So the Joan, like, I'm so embarrassed to even speak her name. It's like, it's such a crazy, it's also, it seems like such like an own of our generation for them to be like, she's the Joan Didion of our generation. It's like, how terrible for our generation if, like, this is what we're fucking working with, Like, it seems like such a mess for us, I think, guys, I think that, but it just puts you in a place to say something like that also. Yeah, that's true. But it's so funny because it's like, Didion's energy is, like, very not like mine. Like, it's like she's so, like, her work is so, like, cool and like, kind of like blisteringly sharp and delicate, and, like, it's very, like, fine boned. It's very, like,
she's like kind of like neurasthenic and like, brilliant in that specific way. And like, I'm like, put me on a reality show, like it's such a different thing. But I think that the reason that it's two things. Like one of the reasons that makes me uncomfortable is I think that like Joan Didion has come to stand for like an idea of a writer. And and our world is already like, I think the internet makes representations of things seem more important than the things themselves, and I am wary about that as it pertains to me. It's like the writing is what's important, like not me. And but I also think the real reason that comparison, I've been getting that comparison, is that it's the sense of dread. I think that she had this undercurrent of dread in her work, and I think I also do in mine. Is this a good sales pitch?
Is it audience time?
Yes.
Okay, so now Q&A.
Yeah, so if you have any questions, we have a standing mic up here if you'd like to line up. And then just to start it off, Jia, what would you like to write about next?
Oh, I don't know, man. I did not want to write a book until I wanted to write this book. Like the idea of writing a book to write a book seems so crazy to me, even though I loved every second of writing the book. Like I find the kind of private agony of writing a book really pleasurable. And the fact that like it was so private for so long, that's what I liked the most about it. Like it was nice. Like I write so much on the internet and things come out quickly, and I get sort of scared that how nice everyone is to me is like making me blow smoke up my own ass, and so it was nice to work in private, and I really I wanted to write about these things and figure them out, but I have no interest. I think I will not at all want to write a next book until I know the thing that I feel like spending 2 years with. And I think that those things, it's they should be kind of far between, something about our world is just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Do we have any more questions?
So I'm good? We can hear? Okay. You studied fiction, and will you ever return to that?
Yeah, I would love to. I would really love to. I've been saying if I got fired tomorrow, I would move to the woods and try to write a novel. But it's hard. I think I like reading fiction more than nonfiction because it feels like art and it feels like magic, and what I do feels like work. And I like work, and I know how to work, but I don't know how to do magic, And so the project of trying to figure out how to do magic, obviously that's, what I would love to try again, but there's also something about fiction is so much about the texture of your narrator's interiority. It's so much about interior texture, and when it's right, it feels like it is a meteor that just landed out of nowhere and you don't know where it came from, but it's perfect. Or it's not perfect, but it's very, very interesting, And my sense of interiority is it sounds so much like me. I think I've been developing my voice or whatever so much just in my job for the last 5 years, let's say, that any fictional narrator I would come out with would sound discomfitingly like myself. But yeah, I'm dying to. I want to. I definitely will try again. But if it's bad, I'll shelve it.
Do you ever do any writing that you don't share publicly? And if so, does it feel different in terms of these ideas of representation and self-delusion and stuff like that?
Yeah. Well, so the novel that I shelved was the last time that I wrote a lot in private, fully with the idea that it might always be private. Unfortunately, I don't keep a regular notebook anymore. And I think that's part of what this book was, to get that sense of writing in private, even for a little bit. But writing just for me, purposelessness, I haven't done that. Writing just to like what I used to do, where you have these little paragraphs laying around. I haven't done that in a long time. Probably was like working a little too much. But I think in general in life, I've been trying to, like, my next goal is to start doing things that are not valuable at all, that I cannot monetize and that I will refuse to monetize. Like, I think I've been thinking a lot, like I've been like plugging Jenny Odell's book like everywhere I go, because it like ruined my life in the best way, and How to Do Nothing. It's so good. And I've been thinking about, like, all the best things in life are slightly out of reach of the algorithm. Like, the algorithm knows about them. Like, it knows about your friendships mostly. It knows about you, but it doesn't know, like, the real stuff. It can't see, like, the real moments that your phone isn't around for, you know? And I've been so conscious of that in my personal life, but have not really applied it to writing. Like, I've let the best of my personal life kind of be lost to the, you know, like, be unrecorded, and like precious to me in private. But I haven't done that with writing, and I want to get better at, like, knowing right away that this will be off limits and it will stay off limits. I think it's important to do that. Yeah.
Hi. I was wondering, like, you're talking about how now you're at the New Yorker, you can, like, lay all your cards out on the table. But I was wondering if there's a time, like, where you had, like, a pressure to be objective and, like, have that omniscient sort of voice, and, like, what you did to sort of, like, deal with that.
I will say, like, I think I credit, like, so much of my ability to write to having had only really, really good editors that have never asked me to do that. Like, maybe if I've ever gotten flickers of that, it's been in, like, freelance one-offs that I was like, okay, I'm not going to work with this editor again. Because I actually think, like, these days we're not, like, there's anyone who is asking you to feign objectivity is asking you to cover something up, you know? Like, there's no such thing as an objective stance. Like, I think we're, like, in an age now where we understand that, you know, it's not just, like, women or people of color that have a perspective that stems from the way they live in the world, right? It's literally everybody. And I think I feel lucky to mostly, I think, you know, any good editor now knows that. And I think, and actually, for better or worse, it's not really something that women or people of color get, you know, or queer people, like, get. You don't really, no one assumes that you're going to even feign that objectivity. You're kind of, it's kind of a pity we don't get a chance to bullshit the way that, you know, like the sort of Chris Hitchens, you know, like, no one really tries to do that. And probably that's all the better for us, I think.
Hi. Hi. Sorry. You said that when you write, you're answering questions for yourself that, yeah, sorry, I'm a little nervous. I'm wondering about when you're writing a book like this, how you relate to kind of your imagined future public. You know, how do you think of it as, like, a public act when it's this private thing that you're just, like, you and your computer?
That's a great question. And again, I'm going to reveal myself. Like, it's like I don't think about it at all. I do try. I was an editor for a long time, and I think that I have a subconscious, like, I think there's, like, a pattern in my life where I am really always running a lot of subconscious calculations, but I'm very rarely running them consciously. And I think, like, it seems like, okay, it's sort of like being on the internet. Like, if you start thinking about how people are looking at you, it's like down that road lies madness, you know? It's like the only way to make these systems bearable is just to, like, be, I think. It's the only way. And I think, like, that with writing, it's like I know that I think I have a pretty high internal bar for fairness and for clarity and for, you know, thinking about being as sort of open. Like, for this book, I do want it to be an object. Like, one thing that I did think about with this, basically the only thing that I thought explicitly with this, was that it's a book that's mostly about women, but I didn't want it to be a book that men would feel like they, like, were, like, taking their medicine if they read it, you know, or, like, doing a good deed or something. Like, one thing that I think is interesting is, like, working at Jezebel, the audience was 50-50 male-female by the time I left. And it was like, I think we're coming around to a thing in this world where we understand that, like, women's issues are not, they're people's issues generally. And I did think about wanting this book to be a book that was about women but not read like that, and not like, and I think like I've been very like, I think it kind of worked, you know, like it's not being pitched as like, you know, book about feminism. It's just that feminism is the default perspective, and like it has basically not been written about that at all. But in general, actually, my friend Julianne asked me about this the other day. She was like, do you ever like, you know, as a writer, like what do you think about like legacy and what you're leaving behind? And I was like, oh no, we're all like I think part of my animating impulse to write is an understanding that it's like, you know, this is like a very like acid trip thought, but it's like, you know, we're like barely here, you know, we're barely here for any amount of time. Like we're barely here for the length of time that like a tree is going to grow another ring. Like it just doesn't, like at best we have right now, you know? And so it's so hard for me to think about being read in the future. I mean, even for me, like all I could think about was finishing the book and wanting to like, it feels like a miracle to be read at all, let alone to be thinking about this in such a way that I could direct what anyone ever thinks or what anyone will think later. And I think that's a little bit of a defensive impulse, but I also think it's sort of a sensible enough way to live right now. You know, it's like it's all possibly futile, so you might as well just try your hardest in the moment and see what happens. And I think that's just how I like live moment to moment. It's like the future could be a wash, you know, but one way to sort of like, the one way to sort of get your odds in your favor is just to act like it won't be, but not presume that you can know, you know?
Hi. As another Asian American writer in Brooklyn, growing up in a conservative Christian environment, I really appreciate hearing you and seeing your work. I'm wondering to what extent, if at all, being Asian American has shaped your voice in this book, and if you've had to accentuate or hide anything as part of your press tour, especially when your audience and general listening audiences as well can be mostly white.
Yeah, I don't know if I think I've always had the sense of, like, I talk to people, I like email with strangers constantly, and they're not, like, it's not necessarily majority white, you know what I mean? Like, at least the people that are emailing me, like, so that's like one thing. I actually, so I grew up in such a white, environment, like you know, 98.5% white at my school, probably something like that. And I think one thing that being Asian and growing up in that environment has taught me about is, like, I think being Asian in terms of the racial politics of this country, like, I think in general being a good writer means you have to hold two conflicting ideas at once, right? And being Asian, it's like you benefit from white supremacy and you also are punished by it all the time. And just knowing that my whole life, like knowing that American anti-blackness was part of the reason that many people found, you know, my non-whiteness acceptable, you know, or preferable, like that like in Texas, like the anti-Mexican sentiment, like that, I realized early on that the things that I hated most could sometimes benefit me. That was like that was burned on my brain as a child. And I think that, you know, even at the same time that like American structures of white supremacy, like did, you know, like I experienced plenty of it from the other end too. I think that having to think about that so intimately has had a huge influence on my writing. I think that it's a lot of what I write about benefiting from systems that punish other people, which is, I think, like one of the difficult things about kind of like trying to be happy in this contemporary world. It's like a lot of the things that make us comfortable punish other people. And I think that is the way that I learned it early on, probably. That's a good question.
Do you think New York City still has something more to give for young people that isn't surrounded by optimization? And is there a place in the world that you dream of living?
Wow, I love that question. You know, I don't know. I'm new to New York. Like, I mean, I moved here in 2014. Like, you know, I'm not of here. Even like one of the reasons I moved here late was because it was already too expensive for me when I graduated college. Like, I was just like, couldn't possibly, you know? So I mean, of course, right? Like, it's like, I mean, the great thing about people in general, and like right now, it's like, even with like using the internet as an example, as an environment that's hostile and punishing, and benefits people that are already powerful or whatever, you know, I think that as long as you have people in a place, and in New York, like, you know, it's so special, like the kind of people that come here and that are from here and that stay here, like there will always be things like that. But, you know, I do think that everything is, you know, basically, like, my baseline understanding for everything is economic and policy based. And I do think, as you know, if New York is impossible for artists without rich parents to live in, then, you know, like, that means something. Is there a place that I would like to live? Honestly, this is like fucked up that this is where my brain went, but it's like Antarctica. Like, I'm like dying to go to Antarctica. To live, I don't know, but yeah.
Hi.
Yeah.
My friend's sitting right here, and I just spent a year living in Russia, and we were very curious about your experience as a Peace Corps volunteer in Kyrgyzstan, I believe, and how that affected your perspectives and trajectory as a writer and as a person.
Yeah. Where in Russia did you live?
I lived in Tatarstan, so it's kind of like Central Asia.
Oh, interesting. So I did the Peace Corps in Kyrgyzstan for 2010 to 2012, and I like probably was like it was a lot. Like, the government was overthrown 7 days after I got there. I was like almost kicked out a bunch of times. I was like probably a monster. Like, it was a lot. And I didn't write about it in the book, or I do write about it a little bit, but well, the way it influenced my trajectory as a writer, that's like, to answer your question more directly, I graduated college and I knew that writing was probably the thing that I was good at, but I didn't understand how I could ever do it, but I still just did it all the time. And so I was there and I started writing this novel. And it was like, this novel set in New York City one day. It was like the frame story was one day, and then it was like back through 4 friends past. And it was about 4 friends who had just graduated from college. The novel was called Girls. Like, fully. This is 2009, like, you know. And then I was Skyping my boyfriend at an internet cafe, like, disguised as a schoolgirl because I was in trouble and couldn't leave my village. So I went incognito as a Kyrgyz person, and was like, you know, wearing like a uniform, and at this internet cafe in the town, like, you know, and someone stole my laptop and stole the novel. And I was just like, I was like, okay, like, I was devastated, you know. It was like it's devastating. It was like that Little Women scene, you know, like, I was just like, man. And I took it as a sign from the universe that I wasn't meant to be a writer. And I was just like, man, I guess that's the end of that, you know. And then one of my friends, and like, this is truly the nicest thing that anyone's ever done for me, my friend Akash, he like, you know, my friends, like, I was like curled into a ball for 4 days and cried, and I like never ever done that ever, and I was so devastated because I was like, I truly was like, this is the end. And I don't, you know, you're 21 and dramatic, and I like then my friend Akash, we were hanging out, he was like, he gave me his laptop, and he was like, and in Peace Corps, like, that's everything. Like, that's your work, it's your entertainment, it's your life, like, it's everything. And we lived like 16 hours away from each other in country. And he gave me his laptop and was like, I know you want to write. Like, I know that what will make you feel better is writing. And he gave me his laptop for a month, and I immediately started writing again. And I was like, wow, you do like to do this. Like, you do. Even if nothing ever comes of it, you know, even if your laptop gets periodically stolen every 9 months, it'll still make you feel clearer at the end of the day. And I don't think I would have understood how compulsively and how much like I actually maybe need to write to like exist properly if it wasn't for that laptop getting stolen. It also, you know, it was just like like, you know, people say I'm humbled when they actually mean like I'm extremely flattered. You know, it's like I'm humbled to announce I've won this huge award, you know? Like, it's like no one ever uses humbled correctly. Like, Peace Corps was like humbling, you know? Like, it was like bring you to your knees, humbling. And that, I think, is never a bad thing as a writer. Like, you can never, being a writer is such like a megalomaniacal endeavor anyway, to be like, buy my hardcover book for $30. Like it's so expensive. Like I've been thinking about that this week, and like I think that coming back with just like a shattering level of having been kind of shattered by that experience was a good counterbalance to the natural sort of narcissism of writing, I think.
Thank you so much for coming. And there's a signing right after.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Thora.